As Will and Nate pass out those, they have the same page this morning. You will find a front and back, and on the front you will find the outline for our Bible class this morning. I did not really have a particular passage, but rather wanted to cover several scriptures that we just kind of cover in a synopsis format this morning as we continue to think about some time robbers. And obviously there are more than these 8, but I want to give you these 8. On the back side of the page, I just call your attention, it is my goal to give you some reading material, be it a page or two, not much, but to give you some reading material for something to do while I'm preaching, right? Every Sunday. So I hope you're reading these. I hope you're meditating on these articles. The one you have this morning on the backside is actually just a column out of a track. It's a track on a Christian's TV guide. Is the track, and we have a few in the office over there if you want to read the whole thing. But you've got the backside, and it just outlines some hours that are spent watching TV, and of course. The tract is, the inside of it is about, be careful with the television. So it didn't really apply to time necessarily, although it's a good read. But it has more to do with, be selective with what you're watching and those types of things. But then on the back, I was amazed at how the track ends is just with some numbers. And how that if you just cut out half of your TV time, something like 23 hours there you could add to your week if you just cut out half of it. And so I have well documented my TV time, so I can tell you that I did not watch a lot of TV yesterday. I did listen to some as I was driving home yesterday. Look at there, I had enough finally. If Nate had enough, I had enough. If Nate makes it back for the first Sunday, we had enough. Oh, maybe not. Couple over there. Thank you. We might get there anyway. So take a look at that. Read what Alan Webster has to say there about the television, and of course the emphasis behind that track is giving you a guide. We began talking last week about time robbers. Somebody came up and said, the worst time robber for me is going to do something and forgetting what I was going to do. I wished I had an answer for that, don't you? I don't know. I've thought a lot about that and the humor of it, and this person was being humorous, but at the same time, there's a lot of truth in it, right? We've all done it, regardless of age or gender. We go to do something and we forget what we've gone to do or why we went to this spot or whatever. And as I pondered on that this week and thought about it, certainly that takes away some time, right? Because you got to backtrack yourself and you got to think about, okay, now what was I doing, and why did I come here? And so there you are, spending some time. And I don't know about you, but I'll just speak from my own experience. Here's what I believe that the problem with that is for me, is that I'm trying to do too much. And so perhaps a time robber. We often get into this, and I've just listed 8 of them here. There's 18 or 28 or 58. One of the problems with a lot of my life is that we get into our minds that if we could do more than one thing at a time, we could accomplish more in the day, right? I'm not sure I'm afraid that trying to do more is actually a time robber. Because of this very thing that we laugh about, that we all have been guilty of doing, forgetting what we were doing. And I'm just wondering for my own life, and I've been contemplating this all week, is, if I would stop trying to do too many things at one time, would that help me focus on what it is I'm going to do, and therefore help me to not forget as much. Now, obviously, you go to do something, the cell phone rings, and boom, there you go, right? And you get off the phone, and then you go, what was I doing? But it's those times where I've got a half a dozen things running through my mind, trying to be productive when, if I'm not careful, all I'm doing is robbing myself of that time. Had another person in this audience come out last Sunday, and you see a little bit of that on the front of your family news, and ask this question: is there a difference between spending time and using time? And so I spent some time meditating upon that question. And I give you just a snapshot of how I answered it on the front of the family news. I didn't answer that person there when they asked the question, but after I had meditated on the question a little bit, I thought it was a great question, and I think it's something that you need to consider and contemplate. And so I'm just pulling out some things that I want you to, I do believe that this class, although it's not much interaction here, and I do apologize for that, it's more of just presenting a lesson from my standpoint, but there are some interactions that are occurring, and I am enjoying that, and I am trying to use that to mold and to fashion into some things that will hopefully be helpful for your life. We're talking about time robbers, and we're talking about things that come along and steal our time. We began last week with 4 of those, and you can see those at the top there. I just listed them again for your memory's sake. The last 2 we just kind of mentioned as we were leaving class. And the key to number 3 and number 4 is balance. You know, I said last week that the key words in there is too much. Too much. Too much of anything is not good. You need to realize that. Too much of a good thing can become a bad thing. And so when it comes to time, and when it comes to managing, and when it comes to using our lives properly, the key word to all of this is balance. Does there need to be recreation? Absolutely. Does there need to be entertainment? Absolutely. Does there need to be time for work? Absolutely. But you've got to balance all those. Does there need to be time for sleep? Time for rest? Certainly. All of that is kept into a balance. So number 3 and number 4, the key concept there is balance. We move on to the last 4, starting with number 5 this morning. It amazes me how many people live in failure, live in guilt, live in shame. Let's just be honest with each other. None of us in here are perfect. Not a one of us. We've all done things, we've all said things, we've all thought things that God wasn't proud of. Call them what they are, sin. We've all been there. We've all done it. The wonderful reality for a child of God is that upon recognizing that, with the right heart and the right spirit, with a contrite heart, with a broken spirit, I can be forgiven. I can come with a proper attitude and a proper heart because of godly sorrow, not read 2 Corinthians chapter 7, because of godly sorrow, not worldly sorrow. Oops, you caught me, right? No, when I come to God recognizing God always seen me, and not that God caught me. He knew what I done or what I said or how I acted or how I treated someone else or whatever the case. When I come to God because I'm sorry that I sinned against God, like David in Psalm 51, then I can be forgiven, regardless of what what the sin is, regardless of what the mistake was. You know, I like using that word because it kind of softens it, don't it? You know, we're wallowing in past mistakes. You know, that doesn't sound as bad as sin, does it? So we use that word to soften it so that we can... But, oh, the people, you realize that depression is the number one psychological issue in the United States of America. We live in the richest country in the world. We virtually have everything at our fingertips. I couldn't even figure out how to change a setting on my phone this morning. So what do? My wife says, Google it. Of course. 37 seconds later, I've got my answer, right? I'm ready to go. But we've literally got everything at our fingertips, and the number one mental illness in the United States of America is depression. Really? Why is that? Well, I don't know. I don't have the answer as to why that is, and I'm convinced the answer is different for different people. But here's what I do know. I do know that it's caused a lot because people are wallowing in guilt and shame and failure and disappointment. And if they continue to wallow in that, then that failure and disappointment can lead to that psychological illness of depression that takes therapy and maybe even medication to break that cycle. But it's a cycle that oftentimes starts with this wallowing concept. And so let's just admit that we've all got a past. And don't misunderstand me. If the sin of your past is not corrected, then you better not move anywhere. You need to get that right. Whatever that takes. If you're not a child of God, then you need to get into the family of God. If you are a child of God and you've got things that's between you and God that are separating you and God, then don't you go anywhere until you get those corrected in your mind, in your heart, and with God. But once they're corrected, you see, oftentimes God forgives us long before we forgive ourselves. And that's what number 5 is. Once God has forgiven you, then you forgive yourself. And acknowledge that God understands. I'm a human, and I fail. I sin. What God is looking for is the right attitude and the right spirit within me that desires Him to forgive me. In Philippians chapter 3, and that passage there where Paul says, listen, there's a point at which in all of life we need to forget what lies behind and strain forward to what lies ahead. You see, guilt and failure and shame and depression, I'm just convinced. I have no statistical data in my back pocket, but I'm just convinced that most people who are clinically depressed are living back yonder somewhere. They're living in their childhood, they're living in their early adult life, and they're beyond that physically. They're older than that. They're removed from that, but they won't allow themselves to be removed. And so they're wallowing in that past failure, in that past sin, instead of trying to move forward. And obviously Paul is talking about life here in Philippians chapter 3, and I understand that in the context. He's obviously talking about, he's using this as a motivation and an encouragement for the end of verse 14 there of pressing toward the goal. But remind yourself in Hebrews chapter 8 and verse 12, for I will be merciful toward their iniquities and I will remember their sins no more. Remind yourself of the Bible reading just this morning in 1 John 1 and verse 9. If we confess our sins, God is faithful and just. Did you hear Andy read that? He's faithful and just to forgive us of our sins and cleanse us. Why would you spend time wallowing in past mistakes? Number 6, worry. I'm probably not the person to be up here talking about worry. My hair's not gray because of genetics entirely, okay? It is gray because of some genetics, right? Some of it's got to do with the fact that sometimes I don't let God be God. You ever been there? Sometimes it's because I'm not convinced that God is capable enough, and therefore I want to help Him out or take His place. Worry. Notice what number 6 is in its entirety. Worrying about what may happen in the future. Do you realize that 80% of things you worry about never happen? Never happen. And I'm worried about whatever on Tuesday or Wednesday, and it don't happen. It just, something changes and it doesn't get there. Our family took a trip not too long ago, and there was a hurricane down in the Gulf, and we were going down that direction. What you going to do, right? Well, you're going to worry. You're going to watch the weather, right? I've thought about this a lot since then. The time I spent watching the weather and worrying, and then it just rained on us. That's all it did. Now, obviously, if it's coming your way, you got sense enough to get out of the way. But 3 or 4 days out, they don't have a clue where that thing's going, right? And so we spend time, concerned. We spend time worried. We spend time anxious. Anxiety. People take medication for anxiety. And don't look to me to throw a stone at them, because I've taken it myself. People take medication. It just blowed my mind that I am so anxious that I'm going to have to take medication to control myself. I did. I had to for a while. And so if you're in that spot now, I understand exactly where you are. I'm just wondering how much time are we wasting, and how do we deal with this? 12% of things they tell us that we worry about, we can do nothing about. Do you know how much I moved that hurricane? Absolutely zero. I didn't move it at all. I didn't send it up north so that all it did was rain on me. No, I didn't do that. Did I pray that we would be safe and the Lord would protect us? Absolutely. Did I pray that we wouldn't have to fly in a plane through it or over it or down into it? Absolutely. But I didn't do anything physically to change that. And so what studies are telling me is that 92%, watch it, 80% never happened. 12%, I couldn't do anything about it if I wanted to. I just couldn't change it. I'm worried about it, but I can't do anything about it. And so what does that leave? Well, that leaves 8%. And the reality of it is that of all the things you worry about, 8% of them have legitimacy. Now, instead of being worried about them, do something about them, right? If it's pray about it, if it's try to act in some way to correct it or to affect the outcome. But what I'm saying to you is that 92% of our worry is irrelevant, basically. And so if we could focus in on that 8% and deal with those things. Romans chapter 8 and verse 28, and we know for those that love God, all things work together for good. For those who are called according to His purpose. Now, oftentimes we misuse Romans 8:28, and we misquote it, and we want it to say everything's going to be good. I'm not convinced that Romans 8:28 even says that everything's going to be for your good, but rather that everything's going to be for God's good. For all things work together for good. But whose good's involved here? And in my mind, God is saying, listen, I'm going to take care of you. I'm going to provide for you. But I want you to recognize that it's not you, but it's me, God says. It's me that really matters. And so I'm going to work everything God says. I'm going to use you, and I'm going to bless you along the way. But I want you to realize that some days may not be so good, but understand that when all of the days are put in the camera, and when you can slide through day 1, day 2, day 3, day 4, and you see some days with clouds and thunderstorms, and then you see some days that are bright and sunshiny. When all of that is considered together, it'll be for good. Perhaps for your good, maybe my good, but ultimately for God's good. So, my suggestion is find those 8% of things that you can do something about and that will actually happen, and put your focus and your time in on them. I don't know how much. Here's what I know. I know in an audience of this size, there are some people in here that are perpetual worriers. It's just bound to be at least one. And so what you're doing is you're spending a great deal of time every day worrying. Now, some of us in here, not so much. There's a few things that come along that grabs our attention, and maybe we do spend a little time worrying about them, and then hopefully we get concerned enough to do something if we can, and then we rock on. So we're not spending that much time. But if you're a constant worrier, had any stomach ulcers lately? You got acid reflux? You got high blood pressure? I don't know. Ask the medical person up here what all it does. I have no clue. They tell me that it'll do a lot of things to your physical body, which then takes more time to go to the doctor, right? So if we could eliminate some of the things that is causing that. And maybe for you, I'm admitting to you that for some of you, I'm talking and you're not hearing because you're not a worrier, and some people are not, but others are. And so they're spending a lot of time worrying about what may happen in the future. This is easy to read, right? Philippians 4. Be anxious for nothing. Well, it just sounds great, don't it? Don't ever be anxious. Don't be anxious. Don't worry about anything. Why in the world, Philippians 4 and verse 6, would you have anxiety problems? That's almost to the point that we go this far with it, right? It's sinful to be anxious. Boy, I said right out of the gate, we're all human, didn't I? If it is sinful to be anxious, I'm convinced there's a lot of people guilty of the sin. Recognize where you are in life and what you can do about it. I'm very hesitant and very careful just to throw people who are anxious and worriers under the bus. Because I think better what we could do is recognize there are some things that we can do something about. And so let's use our effort and our energy to do that. And I believe that if we could, instead of just saying, well, all worry is sinful and we need to stop worrying, you need to stop worrying. Have you not read Philippians 4 and verse 6 lately? Be anxious for nothing, but in everything by prayer. Why would you have prayer in your back pocket and be a worrier? How ridiculous does that sound? Well, that's pretty hard-nosed, isn't it? Maybe even a little hateful. But rather if we could back up and say, you know, there's some things that if I'd stop worrying and do something about it, I could get something done. And then recognize that those things that I can't do anything about, and so I'm going to ask God if it so be His will to do something about it. It may or may not be. And then I'm just going to recognize, you know, I just spent a lot of time thinking about. I wonder, and I'm not. You know me well enough. I don't play politics here, okay? I'm just ready for November to get here and be over, if you want my personal opinion. But I wonder how many people right now are legitimately worried about who's going to be the next president. And do you realize that both of them ain't going to be elected? You realize that, right? So whichever side, you know, if you're worried about this one being president or worried about this one being president, the fact is that one of them's going to be president, okay? That's a fact. And it's also a fact that one of them isn't. So if you're spending your time worried about the one that loses being president, well, you just wasted a bunch of time. Now, there may be some concerns if this person does get elected, what could be or what might be, but again, we don't know. We don't even know who's going to get elected. We don't know what they might or might not do. And so I'm telling you, if you're wasting a lot of time with that, worried about it, it may never happen. What you're worried about may never happen. And so you're allowing that to rob yourself of time right now. My favorite statement nowadays is, I've told you I was a worrier. I was anxious. I'm trying to do better. So my favorite statement now is, if it happens, we'll deal with it when it comes. That's my motto now. You can ask my wife. Hon, we're flying into a potential hurricane. Well, if we are, when we get there, we'll deal with it. If it is, it is. I mean, you know, I'm not going to spend time right now worrying about it because it might not happen. But if it does, obviously there's some planning and efforts that need to go in. And once that time comes, then we'll make those plans and things necessary. But recognize that every day is a new package. It's called today, right? We call it the present, don't we? It's a present. God put a present on your door this morning. It's called today. Don't let yesterday or tomorrow ruin today. One of my favorite statements, I don't even know who said it, one of my favorite quotes. You've never changed a yesterday, and you've never lived a tomorrow. It just doesn't happen. Yesterday's gone. You can't change it. When tomorrow gets here, if it does, guess what it'll be called? It won't be called tomorrow. It'll be called today. Today. This is the day, right? Focus on today. What can I do today? Number 7. Before you think that I've gone to meddling here, let me be very clear. By gossip, I mean in a very broad sense, in a very broad category, that gossip is a stealer of time. Now, obviously, Leviticus 19 and verse 16, the Old Testament, you shall not go around as a slanderer among your people, and you shall not stand up against the life of your neighbor. I am the Lord. Proverbs 26 and verse 22, the words of a whisper are like delicious morsels. They go down into the inner parts of the body. We can talk about backbiting. We can talk about slandering from an Old Testament perspective, even from a New Testament perspective. One of the 10 Commandments, you shall not bear false witness, right? So it's always been a potential in society But what I mean by gossip is even broader than that. I can read statistics to you all day about 95% of all rumors, hurtful rumors, are false. So, there you go, right? You've said it, it's not right, you've hurt somebody with it. Now, not only is it false, but now you've hurt somebody. Well, this is real good, right? Now you're a liar, and you're being hurtful to someone else. Those are not two categories you want to be in, is it? But here's my thing. Here's my thing with gossip. What's its purpose? What's its productivity? And I want you to understand that oftentimes when we say the word gossip, we think you and I sitting around the coffee table, but I'm going to tell you there's a lot of gossip coming through that 55-inch plasma or LCD or whatever you've got, 30-inch tube TV, your old Sanyo, right? Because a lot of those things, a lot of that coming out of there is not true either. And we're ingesting that. And it's nothing more than gossip. Now, you've got to decide, am I going to, I'm not even saying you're going out and repeating it. Just by taking it in, think about what could be happening in terms of time that you're wasting that has no value. It's not even truthful. That may or may not be hurting someone else. That you may or may not be even active in. You may be passive in the whole thing. But as you're sitting there hearing that, what is it doing? And so, I'm asking you to consider that from a lot of angles, right? And so if it doesn't have any productivity, we go back to that, why do it in the first place? And number 8, laziness and idleness. You read those scriptures there. God has never been pleased with laziness. We are told that idleness, we're going to give an account for that, so we better be careful. Even the words we speak in our idle time, we better be careful with that. We better make good use. We talk about resting and relaxing, and perhaps some people equate that to idleness. But don't allow your idleness to get the best of you or to overtake you. Control it. Balance. Maybe there is a time to be still and know that I am God, right? Psalm 46 and verse 10. So there is a time to be idle. But don't allow your life to be overcome with laziness and idleness. And by idleness there, I'm looking, and that's why I lump it with the word laziness. Robbers. What's robbing you? Find it, eliminate it.